Well, welcome to the City of Cottonwood Heights. This is our business meeting on this Tuesday, February 19th, 2019. This is again, the City of Cottonwood Heights. We'd like to begin our meeting this evening by excusing everyone to my right. To my far right is Tim Tingey, our city manager, who is home ill today. He tried to make it, but he's been pretty sick all weekend, so he's not here, so we excuse him. We excuse Christine Michael, a council member from District 4. She's away on business this evening. I think she's in Colorado, could not be here. And Councilmember Bruce, who also is quite ill with actually pneumonia, who cannot be here this evening. So the remainder of the council, we're here, and we'll be conducting tonight's business. We'll begin the meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll ask Council Member, let's see, whose turn is it? Council Member Shelton will lead us, thanks.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Shelton. Next part of our agenda is citizen comments. If you'd like to speak to the council tonight, back on the table is the speaker comment card. You can fill that out and hand that to Dan over to my left, and we'll call you up just to keep some order and decorum. Thank you. Our first individual with public comment is Tim Halbeck. Is Tim here? I know it.
It's got visuals.
We have a multimedia thing going tonight. Okay, there we go. So I thought, Roger, okay. So this is what I used to do before I.
Before you ran for mayor.
Exactly. There you go. Oh, there we go. The guy falling off the motorcycle and going off, that's me. There you go.
Whoa.
There you go.
I actually saw your name at the bottom of that.
There you go. Yeah, I actually got on TV. Yeah. No, actually, I came here to so last year, you guys would know, but you probably realized I haven't been here as much as I used to be in the past. And the reason for that is I had a big chunk of it. This side stopped working. That was because my neighbor, Adam Breen, who is up for 319 and 318A, 318A and 319A tonight for a vote, came over to my house and he said, you're not looking too good. You're not doing the kind of things that you were doing before. You know, if there's anything going on, you need to go to the doctor, kind of thing. He and my neighbor Ryan Snow are the ones who convinced me to go and get checked out, and I found all of these things going on, and it's all good. Change of shift. Shifting. These are the kinds, if you look at the windows here, these are the kind of homes that Adam builds. Totally different from that. There, if you look at these kind of things, look at that. Anyway, my point is, Adam is awesome. Adam is good. Adam is the one that convinced me to go to the doctor and get checked out. He also builds really cool houses. And he builds on properties that people will look at and say, there's no way we can do this. There's no way you can do this. He's for 318 and 319, it's about an acre, but he's building on maybe a quarter of that, a house.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So I would say, please say yes on that. I was going to appeal to the people to your right, but they're not here. There you go. All right. Anyway.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. Teresa, is it Reich? Rich? Oh, sorry.
Teresa Rich. I just wanted to address the council today about the Walsh property. I know I've spoken previously on this topic. First of all, I would like to applaud the effort to finally incorporate public space within this private development. However, I do also want to post a complaint that the most important part of this process for public comment is being done during a closed comment period. We have tried to raise issues that we need to address as public, and that was not addressed early enough in this topic. And I would argue that, especially with the missing councilman, that if we could postpone voting on this for one more session to actually address what is just subpar for this development actually being what I would say is the goal and objective of the PDD, to effectively change the scope of developments, that this public walkway or public easement that has been proposed needs to give the public time to interact with you about that. I still would argue that there are several aspects, particularly pedestrian transportation and traffic safety issues are not being addressed. The traffic report was at the peak and E. It'll be a high E. I've heard from various councilmen saying that it doesn't actually fail until it's off the charts, which I think is ridiculous for a city planning point of view. But not only that, the actual traffic location that joins up at 13th East that was addressed is far enough down the street from the actual entrance, I don't know the term, egress or whatever that is, from the location of the development right next to what used to be called Pinnacle, but it's Ascent now. Those 2 points were never actually addressed in the traffic report. And I think that is a big safety failing, that prime spot was not ever addressed. And I would please just keep in mind that the safety of the residents was never addressed for emergency evacuation, which was several times requested during the planning commission phase. So please vote no, and I do not believe that this PDD zoning is adequate. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Edie Wright?
May I have 7 minutes? I'm talking for my neighbor too. She's going to do some work for me next week, but she couldn't come. She had to take care of her mother. Okay, 6 minutes. Thank you. I have found out of something.
Speak into the microphone now. Everybody can hear you.
Edie Wright. I live on Kings Hill Drive, and I have with me several copies of the report of investigation of Kings Hill Drive. It was written in 1973, but it is still good. Nothing has changed. It is all about the geological study of the Wasatch Fault that runs under Kings Hill Drive for a good part, and therefore I don't feel our area should be available for ADUs. First of all, it's a real hilly area. I also have my covenants for my immediate neighborhood, and it even says there that you are not allowed to even dig rocks out of your own yard. You cannot destabilize our neighborhood. And so how could we possibly have ADUs? I would be glad to give a couple more copies out if you want it. But I just also like to mention a few things. How many more minutes do I have? I like to just read a few things it says here. I will refrain from using the names of the people that live there, but I will give you the house numbers. 8721 on Kings Hill Drive has, after they excavated for the home, they found they had big problems with the Wasatch earthquake fault. And then there is 3 more homes, 8713, 8737, and 8747. That's my neighbors. 2 homes up from my home is the home, the first one I mentioned, that has, I would say, a pretty severe damaged walls in the garage. It's not really public information, but I got it just many years ago. So that is definitely not an area for ADUs. To put more people in where there already should not have been homes according to modern standards. On the excavations of the 3 last mentioned homes, the earthquake area runs right under their homes, and then they go out in various branches on the road and under other homes. There is one whole area mentioned, but that is on a map, and it takes me too much time to mention those things. All I can say, I live in a scary area, and being an old nurse and familiar with evacuations of areas, this is definitely not the area. Please don't turn my neighborhood into San Francisco. Please don't do it. Not just for the earthquake faults, but for the incredible, beautiful of the area where we see that a second and a third generation are moving in, having children, and enjoy the lovely area. My son, I have mentioned it before, will like to buy a home when we can't keep it up anymore. And he said, "Fight it, Mom, fight it," because he happens to live in the outskirts of Denver, close to a neighborhood with ADUs. He says, "Mom, it is trash." That's how that neighborhood has ended up. Now, are you willing to get more people to enforce the existing codes and the new codes in an area where the codes are not being kept at the present time? I have a friend here, she has trouble with the neighbors. There has skiers galore going and coming. I have a home from my side yard where during the summer, the music on the weekends is blaring up from a house that have several young people living in it, and that is totally against the restrictive covenants that says this is exclusively for a one-family neighborhood. How can you possibly come and ruin it? I've even asked an attorney, what would the value of my home drop to if this become an ADU? And he says probably $10,000 to $20,000. Pardon me, I paid for a view lot, a mountain lot, a quiet neighborhood. What's my compensation going to be? I expect compensation if you are ruining my neighborhood and my value of my property. I don't understand this can happen. I talked lengthy with
Okay,
Mayor
Edie,
Peterson.
I'm sorry. We've
It's
let
up.
we've let it go way over, and I really apologize, Kenya. But
Okay.
let me give a quick comment to you, and I don't do this, and I appreciate the audience's understanding of allowing Edie to go over speaking for her whole neighborhood.
Okay,
But
I just want to know where my rights are.
But you've given me a copy, and I have some of that, and give me those again. And you mentioned restrictive covenants you have for your property. If any of those residents have restrictive covenants and are part of an HOA, like I am, the HOA would supersede anything that we would provide as far as ADUs by restricting that.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you some more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Robert Jacobs. Robert, you here? Oh, there you are. Oh.
Hi, my name is Robert Jacobs. I live in Sugarloaf Drive in Cottonwood Heights. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. This has kind of been hashed. The ADU issue's kind of been hashed over. A lot of time's been spent on it, but I think that there's still improvements that can be made to the current ordinance to make it a much better ordinance. And I would encourage you to vote down the current ordinance as it's written. If we still want to pursue ADUs, I think we can do a much better job than the current ordinance we have. What you have to ask yourself tonight is, you have to decide, are you going to allow as a permitted use 2 families to live in a single home in an R1 zoned area? That's a duplex. You have to ask yourself, are you willing to allow as a permitted use up to 8 people to be living in a single home in an R1 zoned area? And I just ask you to consider all the things that are going to be involved in that, the parking issues, the additional density, the transient nature of the neighborhood changing. And I would ask you to vote down the current ordinance tonight if you're going to vote on it. And I would agree with the first speaker here about the PDD. I don't think the PDD project, it's probably improved over what it was. There's now some BMR housing included in it. There's some commercial space in it, not nearly as much as the PDD allows. But I guess you have the ability to look at it and say whether you think what they're doing is sufficient. And if you approve it, I guess you're saying it is sufficient, but it seems like all it's become is a bigger apartment complex than could be put in under RM zoning with some affordable housing in it. But it doesn't nearly come close to the objectives of the PDD. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Eric Cron. Eric?
Members of the council, thank you. Eric Cron. Well, the first time I saw the agenda, I said, wow, you guys are really going to be addressing batting things out of the park that, has been pitching into the game for a long, long time. Growth. You're going to be voting 3, actually, I would say all the items are related to growth of our city. How we grow, what we become in 50 years from now is being decided in a major part by decisions that are being made today. Some of the issues that I have is walkability. And Mr. Shelton has actually said, well, you know, how can we measure walkability? What can we do? Funny enough, there's a website that actually measures walkability of communities in Utah. And we're in the bottom half of the walkability ratings in the valley. And when I hear people being concerned about higher densities, you know, developments that will increase the number of people who live around, their number one concern is traffic. And that's because to do anything around here, people get in the car and they go wherever they need to go. I've been also beating the drum about improving bicycle lanes, improving sidewalks, increasing active transportation in the city. It has to go hand in hand, and actually I would say it goes first before higher density is allowed in an area. And that's because you need to give people the option to move about and the mobility in an orderly, safe manner, and promote it and use it and show that it can be used before we can put more people and more cars and make it more dangerous for people to walk and bike in areas that are going to get congested because it's just going to perpetuate, you know, because of the growth. And that's the concern that I have. I know that there are many things that you're doing. You're trying to do the, you know, the roundabout eventually. We're going to be, you know, talking about that later this year, I'm sure. There's more bike lanes that are getting painted, and I will say I don't see more people biking to schools or to destinations. Look at the maps. Do people in the neighborhoods where the PDD is going to happen, if you guys allow it today, are they walking to Trader Joe's? Are they walking to the restaurants? Are they walking to schools? And if not, why not? And you're going to put more people, and they're going to come up with the same solution, which is get on the car. And that's my concern with growth for growth's sake, which is what cancer cells do. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. David Walsh.
Mr. Mayor and fellow council members, I represent a group, 11 of us, so I would ask for a few additional minutes in addressing this body. Thank you for your careful consideration of the development proposal made by ICO. We appreciated the discussion in the work session and are eager to move forward. As mentioned to you before, I am David Walsh, and I represent the 11 members of the Walsh family who are the owners of this property. The property has been in the family since the 1950s, and the landscape surrounding our property has changed drastically over almost 70 years. Comparing ICO's proposed development to the surrounding community, we believe that there is ample precedent for their proposal to be given your approval. Please consider that this property has been designated for long-term use as residential, high-density housing according to the Cottonwood Heights long-term land use plan since the city was incorporated. Our property is almost completely surrounded by residential, high-density housing that in many instances exceeds ICO's proposal. And these communities are deemed appropriate by prior approval bodies. Further, ICO has spared no expense to create a plan to accommodate neighbor and city feedback. This includes recent changes of ICO's adding affordable housing in lieu of senior housing to meet the city's differing view of ambiguous zoning language, and public open space with the Creek Path, a community benefit made in direct response to your feedback. With these changes, there can be no question that their proposal meets the letter and the spirit of the PDD zone. In view of the legal requirements I see ample precedent for often exceeding the new proposal, a long adopted and never altered city plan
or use plan with which the proposal is consistent, and a highly compliant proposal that incorporates the city and neighborhood feedback at great expense to the developer. I see no legal basis for this proposal to be denied. In fact, if I spoke here earlier and listened to all the comments a month or so ago, and with respect to those who have spoken this evening, I haven't heard one person assert any legal objection to why this proposal should not be approved. Yes, people have their opinions, but they have presented no legal basis why this body should not approve these changes. On behalf of the 11 members of the Walsh family, we urge you to consider this proposal fairly and recall the council's supporting actions in 2018. Please uphold our property rights. We have only been in a few meetings, but we ask you to recognize our property rights. We are the only people here who have any type of property rights that are being considered. Yes, others are here, and they have their opinion, and they have a right to their opinion, but they only have an opinion. We have property rights, and we have the right to do with our property what we deem appropriate. Please recognize ICO's huge concessions made with over 15 major changes at great expense to them. From input over 60 city and neighborhood meetings, surrounding developments have not been held to the same standard as ICO. Please recognize these changes have narrowed ongoing neighborhood clamor. The remaining objectors will never be satisfied and only seek to oppose the project. Nothing I suggest ICO can do is going to appease them. Please proceed with approval to support your long-term documented master plan in a timely manner so that our family can move on from this process that has spanned nearly 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Nancy Hardy.
Hello. I'll face this way since I just wanted to say a couple things about the ADU, and I agree that the ordinance needs to be updated and reflects the concerns of all the citizens that wrote the letters and have spoken out way back when, and all those people probably don't even know that this is happening right now. So I think it needs to address concerns, particularly the enforcement of the ADU, how it will be enforced, and restrictions. There needs to be some real restrictions to set people's minds at ease, I think. And also, I just have a couple questions on the purpose. The purpose A says life safety standards. They want to make it safe. Does the existing city code address life safety issues that already? So that this, it seems like they're already in place. And providing housing options for families in all stages of life, et cetera. Relatives or aging parents should be allowed to live with family without creating an ADU that would affect the whole city. Provide opportunities to offset rising housing costs. So if people are living in an ADU and they pay rent to the owners, is that reported as taxable income? I don't know how all that works. And preserving the character of single-family neighborhoods. I think that needs to be spelled out a little bit better. So, also, however the city council votes, does that represent the majority of the residents of Cottonwood Heights? Or just those that are wanting the ADU, the minority of people that have them right now? because it is taking away the R18 zone. So I guess could the city council explain it, how and why it's that it is taking away the R18 zone. Explain it to all the residents that don't even know that this is in a discussion. Maybe you could explain it in the newsletter or on the website. Say, you know, if we vote for this ADU, you're losing your R18 property, period. And just have an explanation why. And I would say again, most citizens don't know about this, and all citizens will be affected. Thank you.
Nancy, thank you, and thank you for your emails and previous communication. All right, Nancy's the last request to speak card I have. Is there someone else who's not submitted one who would still like to speak? If so, come on up and maybe give me a card before you leave, and we'll document your comments.
Sorry, I was late. I'm Susan Reese. I live in Stonehaven.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. I just am curious. We keep talking about this former plan that says, you know, high density in this area, but a city is a dynamic thing. It's not static. So, you know, in this plan where we constantly, you know, was to all have planned out the roads, and that, you know, in our area that Stonehaven would be this many little buildings, and that Ascent had all these little buildings. Did it have that tiny little road that, you know, was our road out to 13th East? You know, it didn't have all those fine details. So, you know, having this high density plan where Walsh Farms is, it just doesn't make sense anymore to have that there. I mean, when you think about the traffic that, you know, backs up. I mean, we've talked about the traffic studies and all those things, but the reality of all of us that live there is that right now, you know, it's not so bad doing these little kind of do-si-do dances that we do with other cars. Is we pull in and, you know, we kind of wait for one car to pass because there's another car parked on the side of the road. But, you know, you add all those other cars and it's going to be kind of a nightmare, especially as cars are trying to turn in from 13th, turn left onto 13th. And that's the reality. And while these are just our opinions, we don't have property rights. We're the ones living there. We're the current citizens of Cottonwood Heights. And so even though we don't have rights, we have to live there. And I mean, I don't know, that's the reality of our situation. And that's why we are so passionate. And so I mean, I understand that there was a planning in the past, but this is the current situation. And so I feel like maybe, you know, Ivory continues to cling to this plan that was there, but we can't cling to that anymore. So while these are our opinions, they're strong ones, and we're very desperate that you do not vote for this because it impacts us so desperately. And anyway, I think you should know that.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah. Deborah Case.
Hello. As a burgeoning new city, Cottonwood Heights has emerged as a youthful entity brimming with possibilities. Now we face both the trials and tribulations of growing up and making our own decisions. Like a young adult, we wanted our independence so we could have more control and make our own decisions that best fit the future that we, the people, wanted. The choices that we make now, we set precedent for future laws and decisions we take in sculpting our new city. The choices are many, but the right ways are few. In interpreting the laws and directives that are set before us, I hope that we take into account the intent of the law and the vision of its creators. In the case of the PDD, the Planned Development District, it seems evident the desire is to create a flourishing environment that benefits first and foremost the community, not just big business. To create life-enhancing and sustainable areas with clean air to breathe, open areas to enjoy, comfortable paths to walk, sustainable travel methods, existing in close proximity to our more mundane urban necessities, such as work, commuting, and shopping. The PDD is designed to give us control, not to take it from us. Please use its direction with consideration to its intent. I support growth in Cottonwood Heights. Not all growth, the right kind of growth, the growth that benefits the community as a whole, and the direction that we are choosing to go. We need to compare our decisions to the, we need not to compare our decisions to the models of other cities and the choices they have made. We are better than that. For one, we have all chosen to live here, not in that other city. Let's learn from the mistakes that others have made, not use that as justification for making the same ones. Let me remind you that the people want and have voted for open spaces, increased taxation for this purpose, less commercial invasion. The Planning Commission has rejected the proposal for multiple reasons. ICU requested over 30% higher density than is currently existing, compares fully occupied living space to utility underground and rooftop areas, that the project doesn't fill the housing gap, offer realistic affordable housing, have verifiable live-work units, justifiable increased height and density requirements, but this laundry list gets lengthy. Please, let me be clear. I do not support an unnecessary property rezone for the Walsh Farm. I hope that you consider what an asset this untouched creekside property is. Open space without concrete is a premium. How much easier it is to preserve and enhance pristine green space than to cover it with dwellings and concrete first and utilize eminent domain second. When I hear that ICO is demanding higher density because its profit margins aren't high enough, I wonder why build there at all? It's not a good fit. But more importantly, it's not our job to compromise to make ICO's business model profitable. Zoning restrictions are created for a reason, to protect the integrity and usage of city areas. We cannot accept businesses using our PDD as a loophole to circumvent our laws and build haphazardly in our community. A vote in favor is a vote against the strength and people of our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Welcome, Jared.
Thank you. We want the Walshes to be able to sell their property. We support the developer's right to pursue their livelihood. This proposal is too big. The answer to the Walsh's objection just now is that this proposal does not fit the ordinance under which it was proposed. Rather, the PDD is being used to build a larger and therefore more profitable development. And I know the developer probably grits their teeth at hearing that, and they would point to measures they have taken, which the Walshes have mentioned, which have cost them. Yes, they have taken measures. And no, those do not make this a PDD proposal. Look at the proposal. It is just too big. It is just a big apartment complex. A developer focused on their business could perhaps be excused for trying to make this application under the PDD, but the same cannot be said for you, our elected representatives. Approving this proposal would set a terrible precedent, namely that if you feel constrained by the city's zoning ordinances, then use the PDD. A vote in favor would thus transform the PDD into a hazardous legislation, introducing jeopardy to the citizens' positions across the city. Approval would be a black mark on the city council, and citizens should oppose it. Please vote against. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. No, please, no applause. And the reason we say no applause or booing because there are differences of opinions, and we respect all of those. So we appreciate you following those guidelines. Anyone else who would like to speak on any subject with respect to our city? Okay, hearing none, we will close the citizen comment portion of our agenda and move to our standing monthly reports. The first report is our financial report. Scott Burgess is going to do that.
Good evening, Council. We're going to get up a couple of slides here. All right. So we're going to start. This is a new graph, or a modification of an old graph, whichever way you'd like to look at that. The lines on there are the individual monthly amounts collected in sales tax. On the left, you'll find the scale that corresponds to the lines. And then the kind of triangular graph that starts low at the left and goes higher at the right is represented on the right side of that graph for the cumulative total. The lighter, or royal blue, I guess, representing the prior year actual, the purple representing the year-to-date actual. And so you can see, based on this, that we're slightly ahead of last year, which does make some sense in that the economy is doing well right now on that. Do you like this graph?
Yes, I like cumulative more than month to month. It makes more sense to me.
Okay.
Although, before I still can't read the legend completely. I assume that was budget as opposed to previous year.
Oops. It's actually previous year on the bigger going out, yep. And on the left, the purple part is the year-to-date actual. So, and then on the line graph, you can see the prior year budget, but we could dabble with putting the prior year on the cumulative.
Or the other option I had just thought is maybe you just put a note box on there somewhere, this much ahead or behind budget for the current year. That's $10,000, 25 or minus 10, plus or minus to budget. That may be a better way to handle it.
Okay. We'll look at that and see what we can come up with as we try and make these a little bit more useful for you. Going to our next one, this is our municipal energy tax. Again, this is a monthly representation. This trend at least stays a little bit more normal. We don't get quite such wild fluctuations in that, as our energy usage tends to be pretty normal from a month-to-month comparison, going a little higher in the winter time due to the electricity use and gas use. Just a question on this. Would you like to see, again, a cumulative? So I'll make a note on that.
The last one, this would be another place that would make
Yes.
Yeah, because what that tells me is we're just slightly behind what's budgeted, would be my interpretation.
And we didn't change the budget in an upward manner really from last year to this year. In this one, it was pretty flat. But we are just barely below, I would say. Not significantly, but just barely. So anyhow, yeah. So we'll take a look at that and do a little bit of modifications on this, but I think we'll get to the point where we get the information conveyed to you better. This next item is our Class C roads, and sometimes the way this is laid out is good. We receive 2-month increments in terms of our payments, and so you can kind of see the prior years and how they stack up in the different comparatives. We were running quite below and behind in this compared to budget. Our budget being $1,315,000. We at the gray that you see there in 2019, we were significantly behind where we needed to be, and then when the November-December payment came in, which is the kind of yellow color there, we caught up significantly in terms of a year-to-date comparison. We didn't quite get even with last year, but we did catch up quite significantly. I had originally thought that we might be about 100,000 behind on this one. I'm going to revise that and say we'll probably only be about 50,000 behind for the end of the year. Again, though, one collection period can change this quite drastically, as you see that happened in this most recent collection period, but we'll keep an eye on this. Again, this revenue is related to lane miles of roads, which we're not really making significant amounts of new roads, just a few neighborhood roads here and there, and then also population, which we're not really adding to population in our city. All right, and this one I'm going to also adapt and do a year-to-date cumulative as well, because I think it will be a little bit more helpful to try and see what's going on as we see, especially in November and in January, we're quite drastically different from where we really have been in the past, and even in July, the individual month that was represented there, it's quite drastic compared to last year. But in a general sense, we're doing well as we compare to last year. Compared to budget, we're running about right on for where we are budgeted. And so overall in the budget to actual comparison, I think we're in a good place. Compared to last year, we're actually doing quite well, and that's reflective of the cuts that were made to the budget prior to the adoption of the budget in August when that was all adopted. All right, and on this graph we added, we've always had payroll and benefits individually, but we did a combined total so that we could kind of see where we are, because sometimes as you have open positions, your benefits might be running a little better and you might be running a little higher in your payroll. And that does, to a sense, hold true on this. We are running just a tad in front, predominantly due to severance type payouts that we've had in the past. And we don't anticipate anything along those lines going into the future. And that will be something that we'll likely bring to you in March for an adjustment to address that. But all in all, once that adjustment's made, I think we're heading right in a good place and not anything that we are concerned about at this point in time.
Scott, you mentioned a moment ago, you asked about the line graphs. For me personally, these bar graphs are much clearer and cleaner to look at personally. I don't know how the rest of the council feels, but if we can use that type of clarity in some of the other month-to-month things, that might be something you can consider. For me, that's cleaner to look at. Yeah.
We'll do some various looking
rather than numbers crossing.
And yeah. Sometimes it does get confusing when you're looking at that, and I think sometimes looking at the year-to-date is a little bit more
that'll help too.
Representative than a month-to-month.
It might also be interesting in this chart to see the comparison to the previous year.
Yeah. Okay. I'm all
and
about.
We're all piping in, make sure the colors stay the same.
We will definitely try that. So that the last year is a certain color and the budget this year is a certain color and the actual is a certain color. I agree with all those statements, and we're all here trying to get you the best information that we can get you. So I appreciate all this feedback. So moving on to the next area. So we group our budgets. What are we doing here? You know what? I know this one's got a problem already. I can tell by looking at it. So this one, we updated this one. However, I can already tell. No? Sorry. I thought we had a problem in this, and I'm now thinking that we don't. Okay. We're actually good in this one. So what we've done is this summarizes several different groupings of our city government into general government, which would include the city manager, the council and mayor, finance would be in there, IT would be in there, public safety, which would include fire, police, code enforcement, public works, of course, would include public works items, not in the capital items, but just general fund, and community development is predominantly under Mike Johnson. But as we look into this, we adopted this budget a little bit in public safety specifically, where it includes fire through March, because we make quarterly payments in advance. However, I'm a little bit wondering on that, and I want to go and talk to Dave on that and see if we have maybe grabbed the police budget out that far too, because it looks like we might be running a little too well there, because I know we're not that far behind budget. So we'll look at that, but I think the general government, public works, and community development is representative of through January. Public safety, that one may not be, and so I'll do some double check on that.
So Scott, do you feel public works is that's accurate then?
Yeah, where they're just barely below budget.
below.
And I've been doing some other looks at the budget in different segments of personnel and benefits and
Well, talking
operations and
to some
stuff.
other cities the last week, and with the heavy amount of snow removal and the several 100,000 pounds of salt we've had used up, I just was pleased to see that we're still
Now,
within budget.
This is through January.
Yeah,
So it does not include.
It's only February now.
However, I will say that right now Public Works looks all right compared to budget.
Okay,
And
that's
I
good.
don't think that what we've seen, even though they were significant snow events, I don't think that they're going to totally negatively impact us. They will be an impact, but I don't think it's going to take us to a point where we're going to bust the budget.
I applaud that because
Yes.
I've heard other jurisdictions where they've actually gone into the red, so I applaud that. Yeah.
Well, and I know Matt and Danny have been running their guys, like bringing them in late when they think it's going to be a later snow event and some of those
Good.
kinds of things.
Scheduling,
trying to
yep.
work that.
Yeah.
So we've been doing as much as we can do to try and anticipate that. Sometimes things don't always come when you want it from a storm perspective, though.
Thank you.
Can you switch over, Dan, to the other document? So the other items that I'll go through, and I'm not going to go through tons of them, is going to be from the smaller pamphlet that I handed out. We'll refer to some of the pages there just to see if you have any quick questions on that, but we won't go through them too much. And this is a lot of very small numbers, but I'll just going to highlight a couple items. So at the very top of this,
Some of the numbers aren't that small.
well, you're exactly right. The numbers aren't that small. The font is small, shall we say. But the very top of this, you're going to see real property taxes. And this real property taxes is mostly collected at this point in time. There might be a few delinquent taxes that are going to come in before the end of the year, but it's mostly collected at this time. It shows that we're almost at budget. We're about $300,000 still uncollected at this time. But I would guess that over the next couple of months until it gets to the end of the year, that'll probably become collected. And then there's a reconciliation in April with the county treasurer on that. Many of the other sales type taxes are behind in terms of collection at least 1 to 2 months outside of fee and lieu. Fee and lieu, it operates on the same aspect as the property taxes. And that, of course, is our vehicle registration fees. Outside of that, the Class C roads is kind of in the middle intergovernment revenue area, about almost right in the middle of the page, and you can kind of see we're 64% collected, and at that point in time we should be about 66% collected. That's the point in time we are in the year. So again, we're just slightly behind, but not as bad behind as I thought we were originally going to be. Let's see here. And this goes into the general government revenues, or expenditures, sorry. And one note here is on the judicial, the courts. We have not booked through the courts. If you know, we partner with the holiday courts. They've given us reports, and we have not yet booked those through. We're going to make every attempt to get that caught up over this next month so that when we present next month, you'll have numbers to be able to review in that. Outside of that, as you look at any category total, we're running about where we need to be. There's a few of the expenditures that don't come in on an even basis month to month throughout the year, but I'm not seeing anything as I go through this that's causing me any angst or grief that I need to bring to your attention at this time. Are there any questions that you had outside of what I've presented?
Not unless you tell us there's a red flag somewhere that we don't see as the professional.
Yeah, I haven't seen one. The only one that I'm aware of is we'll be bringing to you is the one related to the severance, but other than that, I'm not aware of any others.
I didn't see anything either. Yeah.
So, okay.
All right.
Thank
you, Scott. Appreciate the report. Chief Watson, our UFA report. This is another person who's sick tonight, but he fought through and came anyway. So thank you for coming, Mike.
My pleasure, Mr. Mayor, Council. And I don't have the bug quite as bad, so it wasn't as hard to make the effort. Thank you, Dan. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present the January fire report. This first slide is going to look a little different to you. I will point out some of the changes made. Wanted to be more descriptive on what the staffing part of this looks like. So you can see the staffing under heavy apparatus, and then you can see where we have split out the difference between a 24 ambulance staffed ambulance and what the staffing is on the ambulance, and then a peak load ambulance, which is staffed at certain times of the day. And then you can see at station 116, we've marked that peak load as seasonal. I haven't used the staffing count, I haven't changed the staffing count for that one, considering the fact that it's seasonal and it's only staffed in the wintertime during weekends and holidays. I left that value out of there. One reminder for you is we staff many of our ambulances with one full-time and one part-time medic. We're doing the 1-and-1 now with a paramedic and an EMT. And on the part-time positions, just remember that it takes 2 part-time 12-hour folks to fill one 24-hour seat. So we've reflected that in the totals down at the bottom. With that, you can see that Station 110 came in the number 7 position in total, but in regard to the rest of the UFA footprint. Station 116 came in at the number 15 position. You can see the medical and fire and total values over on the right-hand side of that slide, and we'll of course get into those in a little more detail as we move through the report. So here are the fire calls. This is both stations combined, 47 for January of 2019. You can move to the left and see how that compares to previous Januaries for the past 5 years. By May, we will lose our thin green line because we will be back into the same query. So I'll be glad to see that go away. Here are the medical calls combined for both stations 110 and 116. They closed at 135. Again, you can move to the left and compare that call total to the past 5 Januaries. So here is station 110 now with the 12-month comparison trend lining up. You'll remember December we had a heck of a peak. You'll also recall that compared to, we had 5 other stations that peaked, so we are not calling this an anomaly. It's just a very busy month. So they closed at 124 total calls, 94 of which were medicals, 30 of which were fires. You can see that in all 3 of those categories, they closed higher than the 12-month average. The inverse took place at 116. You can see trend lining down in the totals. They closed at 58, 41 of which were medical calls, 17 of which were fires. All 3 of those are below the 12-month average, so they were slower. Here are the medical calls by type. Number 1 category were falls. Number 2 category were sick person. And then the 3rd category was unknown category, or what we call man down. You can see how that compares to January a year ago. Falls in the number 1 position, common to both, and the next 2 categories were different. Here are the fire calls now. Alarm was the number 1 category. Number 2 category, flooding, hydrant problems, public assist. And then the 3rd category were arcing lines and lines down. You can see how that compares. Alarms 1st position. Next 2 categories, again, like the previous in medical calls, were different. Station 110 now. These are the ambulance transports. Let me get caught up so I can see the values at the bottom of that page. So they transported 39 of 47 advanced life support calls. They transported 14 of 47 basic life support calls. So they closed with 53 transports of their 94 medical calls, which is 56.4%. When we look at this in the 12-month now, again, you can see that peak in December, but 53 total calls, 39 of which were resulted in ALS transports, 14 were BLS transports, and you can see that in the first 2 categories they were above the 12-month average. In the BLS transports, they were below the 12-month average. Here is the 12-month percentage, or the percentage by month now. As I said, they closed at 56.4%. The 12-month transport percentage is 49.3%, but this makes it easy. Just look to the left and see how other months compared. Zone 116 now, and just remember on that peak load seasonal ambulance at 116, we'll get the benefit of those transports when they aren't up in the canyons. So they closed at 27 total transports, 25 of which were advanced life support, and 2 of those calls were basic life support. Again, you can compare it with the 12-month averages up in the right-hand corner. This is the total ambulance transport for monthly percentages. They closed at 65.9%. The 12-month is 50.9%. Here are the fire prevention activities. You can surf through those at your leisure. Here's the safety message. This is also the article that I submitted. I just want to point to a couple of things. I'll start by telling you I read an article in International Association of Fire Chiefs, and Chief Russo and I have talked about this. The gist of the article was that first responders, fire and police, need to become familiar with autonomous vehicles and what they do and why, and so do operators of those vehicles. But Chris Urmson, CEO and co-founder of Aurora Innovations, kind of summed up the changes that have been made over the years to vehicles to make them safer. As you'll recall, a long time ago, seat belts, right? And then we saw things like airbags, and they've built vehicles stronger. What I didn't know until doing my research, that the goal for autonomous vehicles is to make them safer, because the weakest link, no matter what they do to the car, is the driver, right? So that was new to me. I did not know that, and now I'll advance to the next page. These are the different levels of autonomous vehicles. So the very first one was the car that had cruise control, and the next one, cruise control with park assist, right? And when you truly get into fully autonomous, this is becoming pretty exciting. And remember, when we talk about, let me just remind you, autonomous vehicles doesn't mean there won't be any accidents. It just means there will be fewer accidents. So I actually became pretty excited when I read about level 5. There will be cars and trucks and what we refer to as pods on the road by 2025, 2030. And what it means is essentially the technology will be so good that there will be no longer a need for a gas pedal or a brake pedal or a steering wheel. And it'll essentially become privately the convenience of what a bus would be, in that you could open your laptop and do some work or read a book or whatever have you. But the thing that I think is most exciting about that is that someone who is disabled and wouldn't be able to drive any other way would be able to own their own vehicle. For instance, a blind person could own their own vehicle, which would help to make people more independent. And both from the safety reason and for that standpoint, I'm pretty excited about that technology. As they get more sensors in them and more brains in them, and they talk to more systems, satellites and things out on the streets, we're going to see these things come, and it's on fire and police departments to become familiar with those.
Chief, you may not know the answer to this question, but how do the autonomous vehicles react to emergency vehicles?
Yeah, great question. Chief Russo and I talked about that, and they're working on that technology right now to develop a way for them to react and yield. And one of the ways may simply be the same way they do it with intersections now, where emergency vehicles can hit a button and talk to the intersection and change the light. It may be that simple, but that's the next thing that they're working on.
Yes, the other one, I know Representative Spendlove is working on that bill at the legislature. I don't know if that's something that they've looked to address, but certainly something that's considered.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Any other questions for me?
How would police cars use them? No, just kidding.
Yeah, if they could program them to follow the bad folks, that would be great, right?
That would be interesting.
Thank you very much.
Movies along those lines.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. Thank you, Chief. We appreciate that report, and along with our finance report from Scott. I appreciate the audience sticking around. I know you're interested in some of the action items that are before us on the agenda. Now I encourage the council to look at their agenda, and the first item is 4.1, which is consideration of ordinance 316A or 316D, I guess it is, either approving the accessory dwelling units ordinance or denying the accessory dwelling units ordinance. Mike, I guess you don't need to say anything like this. We've been through this for the last year and a half, looking at ADUs, and been encouraged by both opponents and proponents, and from various organizations, both directions. So any comments on this resolution before we move forward?
No. This issue has come before the city almost from day one. It is this is easily the farthest we've gotten. In the past, we have chosen not to pursue it for a variety of reasons, but that's probably the third or fourth time significantly that it's come before us. At this time, I still kind of agree. I think it could use a tweak or two. But I'd like to take a couple weeks to do that. That's kind of where I'm sitting right now.
I guess I'll make a comment, and this has been a challenge for the council a little bit because we have a difference of opinion. I will publicly note that I feel that an ADU ordinance is appropriate. It's something that our city probably needs and desires in the long run. I think it's essential to for some life safety reasons, and we probably have hundreds of them in our community. There's value in having them. We've tried to draft an ordinance that protects the neighborhood values, but at the same time meets some of the other issues with respect to allowing individuals to have someone in their home as an accessory dwelling. However, my big concern right now is still on a couple minor issues that I think we can still work out, but are not in the current ordinance, and that would be centered around the parking issue. I still have some personal challenges with the language, and would hope that we could continue this discussion if the council would so desire. I mean, we only have 3 of us here tonight to vote, so it's a little bit of a challenge, and try and work through that issue on the parking. And I won't go into detail tonight in front of the audience, but in a work session be able to articulate my concerns once again. So I would hope that we could continue it.
Let me comment, just because if I don't, I will be the only one that didn't. So we've worked on this ordinance for a long time. It's been the subject of community meetings, a planning commission. We impanel a planning commission to look at these kinds of issues and bring us a recommendation. We asked the staff to put together their recommendation. Over the year or more that we've been working on this, we have taken lots and lots of feedback from the public. We have sent a survey to the public and asked them some specific questions about how they feel about this item. What I can say is that the staff is supportive of this ordinance the way it's written. That's the ordinance they've brought us. The Planning Commission is supportive of this ordinance the way it's written, and I'm supportive of moving this ordinance forward. We've punished the public for a long time in not moving this ordinance forward, and so that's what I hope we'll do.
Well, you can see that upon the council, we have a little bit of difference of opinion. And so I would entertain a motion to either adopt this or to continue it.
There's probably no one who would like to get it done more than I would right now. I would move that we continue this to our next business meeting and see if we can work out those last couple of details, because generally I am very supportive of the concept.
So Shane, you're going to have to help us. I would second that motion.
we need to have 3 votes to do anything. So if nothing happens, why I think it just remains and will be eligible to bring up on a future agenda.
So do I call for a vote?
Yeah, you
Call for a vote on the motion.
Call for a vote on the motion.
On the motion, yeah. Okay, Councilmember Bracken,
Yes.
Councilmember Shelton,
No.
and I vote yes. So we do not have a majority, so we will continue it.
I'd like to move that we approve ordinance 316A.
Okay, we have a motion to approve 316A. Do we have a second? Okay, hearing none, then we will
Put them
continue.
one of a second.
All right. Thank you. So that will be, we'll continue that discussion. I will again state that I think we'd like to get the ADU to a point that it can be effective and meet the majority of the council's expectations, but obviously that will not be tonight, and we'll hopefully do that in the next few weeks. The next item is consideration of ordinance 317A, which is approving enactment of the PDD1 zone, which is the Waltz property, approving the rezone of the 5.9 acres of real property located at 6784 South, 13th East from R18, which is single family residential, to PDD1, and amending the zoning map accordingly. Okay. Any discussion on that before I call for the motion? Or I can call for the motion first, then we can talk. What would you like?
You got a comment? I do. I was just.
Go ahead, and I will.
I'm sure we all will.
Well, then I'll do as you asked, Mayor. I would move that we approve ordinance 317A.
Speak in your microphone.
Did I not get that? I'd move that we approve ordinance 317A.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve considering ordinance 317A. Any further discussion or comments?
As has been noted, Mr. Walsh did note back in 2005 when we did the general plan, this particular parcel was slated for multi-family development. And honestly, if had it not been, then I may have been of a different opinion now. But with that being the long-term plan, where it's possible, I think that we should conform to that. The other reason that there are a number of other reasons that I am supportive. It is its immediate neighbor to the east actually has more units or not more units, but a higher density and height. The others are similar, and although I know that it's not always popular with everyone, the traffic study was done. It did consider 13th East, and it did not move it to a point where that it was failing. The other reasons that I find this also go back to the general plan. Under the standard rezoning practice, just doing this as an RM zone, compared to what has been proposed by ICO, I see a difference in setbacks from as little as 10 or 20 feet to 50 to 75, which the PDD has allowed us to push these buildings away from the sole single-family residence that is there in this entire area. Everything else is either commercial or multifamily zoning. It allowed where we can, because this is a legislative action and we're creating the zone, the preservation of the trees. I think the building of the trail gives us some potential for a very nice, if we can find a way with the homeowner or the properties either to the north or south to connect that to either Fort Union over by the freeway, that does become a significant public attraction. And they have agreed to do that at their expense. I appreciate that. And the other one has been expressed here was parking. The parking requirement on this one is a 1.8 per unit rather than the 1.2, which has unfortunately caused some of the troubles with the neighbors. And so there may be some others in there, but that's kind of the core of I do feel that it meets the PDD. I don't feel that this somehow compels me or a future council precedent-wise to ask for more or something different from a different PDD application. Each one will be unique. This one is offset from our main thoroughfares. If it was on Wasatch Boulevard or on Fort Union Boulevard, I may very well feel differently. But this proposal...
We can't hear you because you're not speaking into the mic.
Were it on one of the main corridors, I may very well feel differently, but I think that this proposal for this particular parcel meets the intent of the PDD ordinance.
This is a very difficult issue, and I know that many of you who are, I will say, my neighbors, though you don't live right next door to me, you live in my district, and I am especially in tune to listening to what you say. I know how passionate you are about this situation, and I get it. We are all very passionate about our properties, and so. While I am very sympathetic with the things that you've said and the ideas that you've brought forward and the motivation behind those ideas, I think there is an important set of ideas here that as the land use authority, we are bound to live by. I think it was Mrs. Reese who said that we don't live in the past. But planning is one of those places where the land use authority is required to live with the standards they set in the past. And not that you would hold us blameless for a decision today because we'll say the standards made us do that. We set those standards. The three of us who are here tonight were very involved with setting the standards, with creating this, with this ordinance. And if there's a black mark that is a result of our decision tonight, I will take my share of that black mark. Not that that makes anyone feel better, I understand. But once a decision is made in a land use question and an ordinance is created, that framework binds the land use authority in terms of what must be done. I agree with what Mr. Walsh said. He, in my opinion, correctly articulated the facts, and the facts are that this development application complies with the standards that we set. And if a land use application complies with the standards that are set, the land use applicant has the right to have that application approved. And that's my opinion. That's how I come to my decision. I think, by the way, that the land use application has not always complied with the standards that the city set. There were several disagreements with the land use applicant about whether they met the standards in certain areas. And what I can tell you is, to my knowledge, the land use applicant complied with every requirement that the city demanded of it to comply with the standards in the ordinance. I think that of the things that come from this, I hope well, let me say one more thing about this ordinance. We have learned through the process of dealing with the PDD ordinance that there are some things that we would do differently if we had the opportunity to do them, and we will. We don't have the opportunity to do them differently for this applicant. This applicant has the right to be heard under the ordinance as it existed when he applied. But this ordinance is not perfect. It has some things in it that have caused us some difficulty through this process, and I hope we will fix those things. I think that is the nature of most of these types of things, is you learn a lot through the process. Hopefully you catch everything up front, but it's often not the case. And so here I hope we will learn from the things that were difficult and were maybe ambiguous or created confusion or created a situation that might not have been consistent with some of the goals of the ordinance. I appreciate, though, that we have had, in this case, a land use applicant who worked hard to find ways to comply, even when their understanding was not in line. Their understanding of the ordinance was different from ours, and though they're doing something here that most in this room oppose, I think on balance, if it's not something that is in your backyard, you recognize that this developer worked hard to comply.
We thank you for those comments. I have a couple of comments of my own. And I spoke with many of you in the audience, and I sound a little bit hypocritical, but if it was under my control and hadn't to account for anybody, didn't have to follow any laws, ordinances, I would make it a park. I admit it. I'm a parks and recreation practitioner by trade. That's my passion. I didn't have that option here, and we could spend days talking about those options. I think, as Councilman Shelton articulated very well, as land use authority, there are certain standards set, and our applicants have met those standards. And I think even gone beyond. I've been able to articulate some of my concerns, so fairly minor, where they've made adjustments, and I appreciate their efforts. I agree, we don't need or desire high-density, compact developments everywhere in our city, as many throughout this valley would suggest. I'm opposed to that. I admit that. And we continue to get pressure every day that we should be providing more and more high density to meet all of the housing needs. But I believe there are pockets or areas in our cities that can be appropriate if well planned. It's not our goal, but it's sometimes an outcome of some good planning. I think this is one of those areas that can work. I know many will be disappointed. I even went down there and drove the area again this morning myself, and I see some of the challenges, and I'm going to watch very carefully as this project progresses to see that some of the commitments are made and are assured that they're kept as far as access and parking and traffic and saving the trees and the trail and the setbacks. You know, I'm so concerned about those because it's been tough. But as, again, Councilman Shelton articulated, as a land use authority, they've met those standards based upon the ordinance, and I think we're bound to approve based upon those, and those are my comments. Any further comments from the council?
I'll apologize for not taking the mic. I usually get a yes or a no, and that's about it. So I will work to improve that in the future.
I think one other thing I would say is that those of you who have a sincere desire to see the standards set in a different way, the place for you to be involved is in the planning process. And as a council, we have set as one of our priorities for the year to undertake the work that is the predecessor to those planning processes. And we would invite you to continue to be passionate and to continue to be involved and to make your voices heard at a time when we're involved in planning.
Okay, thank you. I'll call for the vote. Councilman Shelton,
Yes.
Councilman Bracken,
Yes.
and I will vote yes. Okay, the next item is consideration of ordinance 318-A. It's approving general plan amendment for real property located at 7559 and 7571 South Prospector Drive from low-density residential to medium-density residential. Any comments on that ordinance?
Councilman Shelton has to go first this time.
Mayor, if I can make one quick note. This is separated into two action items. The first being the general plan land use map amendment, and the second being the actual zone change. They go hand in hand and were presented as one item, but technically they are two separate actions, which is why those are split.
Motion could be made together.
Thank you for clarifying. I know we talked about it in the work session that it's two separate items, but yeah. And Mike, you should remind me. I should have had you summarize things earlier too, but we're ready.
As a reminder, the rezone can only be considered if the general plan amendment is approved.
Right. Okay. So the first matter of business is the rezone then.
The general plan.
The general plan, I'm sorry. General plan amendment, then we'll do the rezone, of course, yeah. So do we have a motion on approving the general plan amendment?
I move that we approve ordinance 318A.
Okay, it's moved by Councilman Shelton. Do you have a second? I will second it. I haven't done this before. Any further discussion? I'll call for the motion.
This one is challenging. I certainly understand hesitancy on this one. I understand the applicant's argument for keeping the overall units per acre density the same, but also understand that were the entire area to be developed, it is R1. I guess I would kind of lean towards it needs to be a little broader of a general plan amendment than what it currently is.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? I'll call for the vote. Councilman Shelton?
Yes.
Councilman Bracken?
No.
And I will vote yes. So it does not move forward.
Which means 4.4 is no longer.
Yeah, so 4. Okay. Okay, we'll now move to Resolution 2019-12. This is approving entry into an independent contract agreement with Spectrum Engineering for a feasibility study looking, I think that's $3,500 looking at solar panels, et cetera, on the roof of the City Hall. Any further discussion on this issue?
I'll be very interested to see what the results of this are. We initially planned the building to allow for solar, but at the time it just wasn't, the payback was just too far out there to make it feasible. So I would approve that we approve Resolution 2019-12.
It's moved by Councilman Bracken. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Shelton. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. Councilman Shelton?
Yes.
Councilman Bracken?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. Next item is Resolution 2019-13, approving and ratifying acceptance of a bid and awarding a contract to DRD Paving for the Big Cottonwood Canyon Trail, or finishing that trail, for an amount of $189,000. Any further discussion on this resolution?
Clarity 6, that improves, that makes those changes in front of the two properties where it was incomplete, plus
Correct.
Maintenance and upkeep, or some improvements along the entire trail.
Well, it's primarily for that completion, I think the budget came in under, and hopefully we can.
The budget came in under the estimation, engineer's estimate. We are working with the, it's a fund. So we're looking to, we have to stay within this general area. So we're looking at some other things, trail maintenance and or improving the storm drain in that area coming off of. So there's a few things we're playing with.
That trail's been around long enough that it's seen a little bit of.
Yeah, yep, there's definitely some root damage and stuff. But this is for the completion of trail between the, I think it's the Neff property right there on
Correct.
Big
Yes,
Cottonwood Condo Road, and completing that and some other side improvements. Do we have a motion for approval of that resolution?
Move that we approve Resolution 2019-13.
It's been moved by Councilman Shelton. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Bracken. Any further discussion? And then I'll call for the vote. Councilman Bracken.
Yes.
Councilman Shelton.
Yes.
And I will vote yes. Next item is consideration of a resolution 2019-14 approving a grant agreement with the state of Utah. This is with our Arts Council for $2,750.
I always love to approve resolutions where someone gives us money, so I move that we approve Resolution 2019-14.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Councilman Shelton, seconded by Councilman Bracken. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. Councilman Shelton.
Yes.
Councilman Bracken.
Yes.
And I will vote yes. Okay, the last item on our agenda before we adjourn is the consent calendar, which is approval of City Council meeting minutes for January 8th and 22nd.
I move that we approve the minutes. There were a couple of minor changes.
Okay.
Second.
It's been moved and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Now entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and second. We adjourn. All in favor, aye.
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 Aye, we're adjourned.
Well, we got half of it. I'm glad you did. Decide on that.
Yeah. That would really not be good. Are you going someplace again? Hey, you.
Well, and I don't go to the parking lot.
Are you going home?
No, not yet. I'm going to.
Are you? Where? Caribbean?
No, I'm doing the little one that goes LA, Catalina Island.
Nice.
They're
nice.
taking Sophia, so they'll do a small one and see if they want to
Sweet.
take her on another
Sweet. Oh, she'll love it. She'll love it.
I'm taking my mother.
What line are you on? What line are you on?
Carnival.
They probably have a good kids program and
Yeah.
stuff, don't they?
My thought always has been the
Good.
PDD allows
That was the important check it out was the first thing they
Yeah.
planning more the way the public
See you when we
expects it.
disembark after the cruise, sweetie.
It's a 3-day cruise. You know, I'm going to spend the first day making sure she's okay.
Let me tell you, when cruises are involved, age doesn't matter. We have taken, all right, let's see, both of our two youngest daughters on cruises. They had some deal, basically add a bunk bed in your, or add an extra bed in your room for $100. This is how in America, so our two youngest daughters did that. That's a relaxing cruise, to have your adult daughter sleeping in your room.
I'll have my mother-in-law and my daughter.
Yeah, your mother-in-law.
She's going to be snoring.
Okay, so you grabbed him off there, did this, put it in the file.
And most of them meet on Tuesday.
Publish it.
I'll bring it tomorrow. I know you will. I like your glasses. They know
I think she does. He can tell you that.
It's picking up. It's different.
I like it. Yeah.
I have a picture from high school. So, this Kathy, did I tell you?
No.
So, this Kathy, this lady that comes to council sometimes, she was like the book. She puts out book movie holes and says, take a book, leave a book kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, I
And
like
she
those.
she makes us cakes and she does things with it. She's really a nice lady. So, she's, no. So, but she texts me on Facebook and I look and so it's these people you know together. And I look, it's this girl. I said, you know, Betsy Sayers. She says, how do you know Betsy Sayers? And I took her to prom. I met her. She says, she's my